What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and did you know that in Marvel Comics, Man-Thing owes his entire existence to Captain America? We're going to talk about whether or not they're going to put that in the MCU in this video, because in this video, we're talking about how amazing Werewolf by Night was, which, by the way, normally this would go on Geek Culture Explained, but I'm giving the staff over there a few weeks off, so we're putting it up here on Comics Explained. Werewolf by Night was phenomenal, and I'm not even going to lie to you guys, I kind of feel like this is what Phase 4 should have been, to be honest with you all, right? World building and that kind of thing. Technically, we did get WandaVision, which was 9 episodes, we got Loki, which was 6 episodes, and they did a lot of work in terms of expanding what some of the characters that we were familiar with were capable of, specifically Wanda, Loki's building the multiverse. But beyond that, I don't think we needed like a 9 episode, I think it's 9 episodes, season of She-Hulk. Honestly, I think this would have been great. Just a series of one-shot episodes, like specials if you want to call them that basically introduce us to new characters that we otherwise never would have seen or heard of in the MCU. Having said that, this show was phenomenal. It was perfect in almost every way. It had everything. I mean, as perfect as you get when it comes to the MCU. Like, by the time you got to the end, yeah, it was really formulaic. It was your Marvel Cinematic Universe formula that we've seen time and time again, which is really starting to grow old, and we're really noticing it now more than we ever did before. But this show was great. It was absolutely well done. First things first, I loved the black and white aesthetic. God, that just made it so cool. And it followed the horror theme perfect. It really felt like the old George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead, if you guys ever saw that movie. Not the one with Tony Todd, but I'm talking about the original, the old black and white one. But this just had this great, just sort of like 1960s, 1970s black and white horror aesthetic, which is really cool because that's kind of the genre that Werewolf by Night fit into when it came to Marvel Comics. Those of you guys who don't know, Werewolf by Night was the attempt by Marvel Comics to bring back the horror genre. The way that the kind of nature of comics worked back in the day is like you started off with superheroes when Superman was first introduced, then superheroes stopped being popular, so you went into science fiction, and then they started blending superheroes and science fiction. But as part of that science fiction popularity, you saw the horror genre becoming really, really popular. Now, by the time guys like Spider-Man started showing up, superheroes were the name of the game, but there was an effort to kind of see if there was a way to bring that horror element back, and like Swamp Thing, Man-Thing, Werewolf by Night, they were all attempts to do that. Swamp Thing, of course, was a DC thing, but still, there were attempts to do that, and there were others as well, right? Blade and Michael Morbius and so on and so forth. But the important thing that I'm talking about here is that in relation to the show, it really had that great horror element. It wasn't over the top, it wasn't like terrifying, but it did have that kind of spooky, you know, like they're coming to get you, you know, that kind of feel, and I absolutely loved it. Oh my God, I loved it. Having said that, Elsa Bloodstone was great, and I really want to see more of her in the MCU. Absolutely, I want to see more Elsa Bloodstone. And the great thing about this, right, the great thing about this, Blade, we know, hopefully, fingers crossed, maybe is going to get a movie. It's been pretty rough over there in the Blade landscape in terms of them being able to just create a film based on the character. Like, the director just left with like 2 months before they're supposed to start shooting the film, so, and apparently they're like reworking the script and everything, so it's been a rough go of it. But the cool thing is that what I think this show is going to do for just the general Marvel Cinematic Universe audience, and maybe even just the general movie audience, is this going to give people a desire to see the monster side. Because as a comic book fan, I'll tell you right now, where monsters dwell, Monster Island, all that kind of stuff, it's really cool. Like the whole monster side of Marvel, the whole like darker, evil, Midnight Suns, even Doctor Strange to a degree, right, with his 1990s run of the Defenders, a lot of those things were really, really awesome. And there's just some like untapped potential when it comes to what the MCU could do with that. So I really hope they decide to build on this and to have kind of like 2 themes running at the same time, where like the TV show is one part origin, one part like all the monster stuff, and the movies kind of stay the movies, where they kind of do their own movie thing, occasionally dipping into the monster side. But what I also want to talk about here is I want to talk about Werewolf by Night, and I want to talk about Man-Thing. Now, I'm not going to give any spoilers to what's going on with either of these characters in either of their story arcs, but what I will say is they have some development. Werewolf by Night has development really just knocking everything else out of the park. I loved the whole thing, right? Like the character of Jack Russell and like the actual werewolf persona. I loved it all. And here's one of the best things about this. One of the best things about this whole thing, right? It wraps it all up in just one nice, neat bow. But the whole thing's self-contained, right? So you don't need to know anything else about the MCU in order to appreciate this, right? You sit down, you watch the show, you know it exists in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and that's enough. Everyone that you're going to see in this show is brand new. You've never seen these people before. You've never heard of them before. It's 100% self-contained. And that's why I say, I really hope it all makes sense. For those of you guys who are hardcore comic book fans of Elsa Bloodstone, the Bloodstone itself, and really the role of Ulysses, follows almost rank and file with the comic. So you can certainly just be like, yes, like I am so excited to see that, because there are some hardcore fans of Elsa Bloodstone and Ulysses Bloodstone that are out there watching this show. That being said, the properties of the Bloodstone are exactly the same as they are in the comics. I don't know if it's really any kind of a spoiler, but basically it just grants you a variety of different powers, some of which are more attuned to being a monster hunter than anything else. But the fact remains, like, there's a lot of really cool elements here. One of the things that I wish they had done, and I understand why they didn't do it and they don't really need to, but one of the things that I wish they would have done is kind of expand a little bit more on the other monster hunters who were there. All you're really told is that they're people who hunt monsters, and that's it. And admittedly, that's all you really need. To add that exposition in, you would expand the length of the show from being an hour to being an hour and a half. And honestly, that probably would have felt like a little too long. But before we talk about Man-Thing and the Captain America relationship in the comics, what I want to do is I want to kind of wrap back around to the beginning, and I want to say, this is what Phase 4 should have been. This is really what it should have felt like, a series of just one-shots, right? For those of you guys who aren't familiar with comics, this show is the equivalent of a one-shot comic. That's it. A backup feature, if you want to call it that, or something like that. Something that's not tied into anything and just tells you a story about a character, and you know they exist in Marvel, but from start to finish, it's completely self-contained, and you're not left confused about what's going on in relation to like everything else. If at the end of Werewolf by Night you're confused because you're asking yourself the questions like, where are all the superheroes, and where's this character, and where's that character, and so on and so forth, you're confusing yourself. There's no reason to concern yourself with like where any of the Avengers are, or where this takes place in the timeline, or anything like that. It doesn't need to answer those questions. It's introducing you to characters, and that's it. And they could have done that with She-Hulk. They could have done that with like anybody else that they wanted to bring in. I mean, if they wanted to offer more explanation on the character of like Taskmaster, or if they hadn't even given us Taskmaster in Black Widow and they wanted to introduce us to Tony Masters, this would have been a great way to do it. This has endless potential, right? Like, it's just so easy to follow, and this is exactly what Phase 4 should have been. Hey guys, here's a character, here's the information you need to understand the nature of this character, we'll explain their background story later, have fun. And like, that's it. And that's all you really need. It would have been great. Having said that, let's talk about Man-Thing, and let's talk about Captain America. So in Marvel Comics, one of the things to know is that when Steve Rogers was made into Captain America, as most of you guys know, probably from the MCU, the super soldier serum died with Abraham Erskine. There was no conceivable way for anybody to duplicate that exact serum. But a lot of people tried, and one of them was a guy named Ted. And so what Ted had done is that in an attempt to reverse the nature of the Captain America Super Soldier Serum, which seemingly he was about the closest that you got, right? The closest to actually getting a tried and true Captain America Super Soldier Serum. But in an attempt to duplicate that, his work was basically discovered and ultimately funded by Advanced Idea Mechanics. Now in the MCU, Advanced Idea Mechanics was in Iron Man 3. They're totally different from the comics. In the comics, AIM started off as Hydra's science division and then broke off and formed their own thing. But basically, once Ted had realized that AIM was trying to get a hold of his research and knowing they would use it for nefarious purposes, what he did is he injected himself with the only known duplicate, or as close as you can get to the duplicate, of Captain America Super Soldier Serum, and then destroyed all the documentation showing how to make it, and then jumped into a lake which had magical properties in the original telling of the story, and then the magical properties combined with the Super Soldier Serum turned him into Man-Thing. Now in later years, they basically said that he made a deal with the devil. So I don't know which one you really want to believe. Honestly, it's whichever one you want. But the cool thing is that can be explored in the MCU, right? You can explore that relationship, that Ted was a guy who was trying to copy Captain America's serum, and things went awry, and ultimately he ended up becoming the person that he was. I don't know if they're ever going to give us that backstory, but the important thing here is that this show was great. It was absolutely phenomenal. It was just beautifully shot. They even included the little transition things. Those guys who aren't aware of that, when you were watching the show, you will have noticed from time to time, up in the top right-hand corner, this little round oval would just blip in, right? It would just just like that. That's a signal to the theater to transition the film, right? To put in a new piece of film so the movie can continue on. That's how they used to do it back in the day. Now, they didn't do that here. This whole thing was shot digitally, but it's cool that they added the small little unnecessary aesthetics in order to give it the feel that it was shot back in the day. The attention to detail was phenomenal in this show. It was great in this show, but I love the environment. I love the overall area. I loved the maze. The whole thing was cool, right? But again, I am really excited to see where we end up going in the direction of Elsa Bloodstone, Jack Russell, Werewolf by Night, and the Man-Thing. I'm really excited to see where their stories take us in the future of the MCU. But with that being said, guys, let me know what you think down in the comments section. Give me your thoughts, your opinions. Did you love it? Did you hate it? And I will catch you all later. Peace.